Confetti Covered Quicksand, Chapter 14, Aspen. It was the summer of 1996. Everyone was afraid of mad cow disease. A sheep was cloned. Madonna had recently announced she was pregnant with her trainer's kid. I remember hearing a lot of Toni Braxton, namely, "You're Making Me High" and "Unbreak My Heart." I listened to George Michael's single "Fast Love" a lot. My nails were painted white. Friends was the big show. Everybody wanted the Rachel haircut. My favorite movie that year was Beautiful Girls, starring Timothy Hutton and a very young Natalie Portman. It showed a slow, snowy little town, somewhere I hoped to be. And that is exactly where I was headed. My grandmother's new husband was driving 30 miles per hour in a large bucket of a car, degrading my grandmother the whole way there. We stopped to eat at a Denny's, and he was just terrible to the waitress. She would have been a saint not to spit in his Superbird. He left her a $1 tip after being totally demanding and rude. As we were leaving, I snuck a few extra dollars onto the table, and he turned around and caught me. He was furious, like punch someone furious. He called me a whore in the car. He said anyone who wore false eyelashes was a whore, plain and simple. I was like, okay, I'm a whore. Can we hurry up and go now, you old fuck? I thought he would dump me out in the desert and drive off. Anytime he had to ask something of me, he asked it through my grandmother, such as, ask her if she would please stop cracking those sunflower seeds. I was stuck out in the middle of nowhere, so I had to bite my tongue. We spent the night at a motel that looked as if it had housed many a serial killer mid-spree. I think they paid for me to have my own room because I remember being in one by myself and feeling relieved. My grandmother called me once I got to Colorado and said it would be nice if I thanked Reginald for letting me drive with them. I bit my tongue while he got on the phone, and I thanked him. He mumbled in a fake aristocratic accent, got off the phone, probably made himself a Southern Comfort on the rocks, and then beat my grandmother for the hell of it. But that's jumping ahead. At this point in the story, I was there in the big old car, driving through the desert. Maybe it was Utah, I can't remember. We finally arrived in a little town in Colorado. My Aunt Billy lived in this big yellow house at the end of a cul-de-sac. There was a pasture behind her house that was full of cows. I was so stunned. I remember feeling a little bit taken aback. There were mountains everywhere. There were pine trees. I mean, this was not a congested city full of crime and debauchery, as I was accustomed to. They showed me to my room, which was in the basement. I loved it because there was a sunken-down window. If I looked out of it, I could see up to the grass in the backyard. I liked it because I felt safe. I was very happy to be away from all of the bullshit I had created for myself. No turning my head away from drug deals, no roofies slipped in my drinks. You had to be a natural beauty in Colorado because there wasn't much to help you out. I was very average without lots of makeup, so that is one of the first things I dealt with there, and it was much needed. I was painfully worried about my appearance living in California. I was convinced that everything rested on what I looked like. I required several products to keep myself looking groomed, none of which was available to me any longer. I wore certain makeup, I used certain cleansers and lotions, had to have my ultra-expensive hair products, all purchased from the beauty supply stores that dotted the valley. I had a little bit of it all to tide me over, but once that ran out, I was going to have to make some changes, and that terrified me. I realized I would eventually be faced with myself, stripped of all of my calculated glamour. There were no beauty supplies in town. There weren't even any chain drugstores. Could I do this? Could I live in Colorado? Journal entry August 10th, 1996. Jack and Allison were right. The only outdoor activity I have ever done was walk into a club. How will I adapt to this unfashionable, outdoorsy, nature-oriented atmosphere? I am the complete and utter opposite. Where will I fit in? I am renting a room from my Aunt Billy and Uncle Ron for $500 a month, which includes food and utilities besides the phone. I doubt I will even use the phone. There is nobody I even want to call. I just want to start over. After the shock of not having all of my beauty crutches wore off, I settled into a beautiful realization for which I was eternally grateful. Billy loved me. She cared about me. She didn't just assume I was evil or watch her back around me, despite a phone call from my mother warning her to do so. She never withheld affection from me. She trusted me. I had not experienced that in several years. I am not saying I was trustworthy to my own family back home as a teen. I wasn't. Maybe I deserved that. But this time, someone was saying, hey, I heard all the horror stories about you and I don't care. I'm going to love you anyway, and I'm going to find out for myself who you are and if you are to be trusted. I was astounded that someone was giving me that chance. It took me a little bit to get into family mode. Billy, Ron, and their 3 kids, around 9, 7, and 3, all ate at the dinner table together. They watched a family movie together on Friday nights. The kids were like puppies, yipping around excitedly, getting ready for birthdays, holidays, school, and sleepovers. It comforted me greatly to live in the house with them and be a part of their family. Doing so saved me from becoming a very jaded and bitter person. Now it was different. I was living under a roof with my blood relatives, kids that poked at me and smiled at me and admired me and asked me tons of questions. An aunt that saved me from God knows what just by taking an interest in me each day and talking to me on a deep level, just talking to me at all. Getting to know me, expressing love toward me. I talked to her about the way my father was toward me as a preteen, something I had not yet discussed with anyone. She became furious. She wanted to kill him. I was stunned that someone was finally getting angry about what happened to me and validated it for me. It was the first time someone told me I had a right to be pissed. And not only that, but another piece of the puzzle was uncovered for me. Billy confided to me that my father had been sexual toward her as a young girl as well. It wasn't just me. It wasn't in my head. I don't know if you can imagine what it is like being a child and dealing with your own father behaving in a pervy fashion toward you, but what happens is this. You don't want to believe it. You try not to think about it. You try to ignore it. You think, maybe I just took that wrong over and over. In order to go on, in order not to crumble, you must not let yourself acknowledge this fact. If you do, you will flee from the danger, and you can't flee because you can't live on your own yet. You need the roof over your head. You need the clothes and the food and the school. You can't tell anyone because that would require acknowledging it, and you just can't. It is too disturbing. It is too vile. It's crushing, it's confusing, and it is the biggest mindfuck you could ever endure. The person who is supposed to take care of you, the person who you should feel safe to run to, is actually the wolf, the devil, the person who you need the most protection from. It makes you go outside of your mind, outside of your body to survive. You are floating with a lump in your throat and a pit in your stomach, trying to pretend you are normal, but feeling eternally dirty and tainted and ugly. There is a lot of moving things around in your mind. There's a lot of doors that are shut and never opened. Billy's husband was friends with one of the local restaurant owners in town. There were precisely 2 restaurants, and he got me an interview. I got the job and started working at this pretty log cabinish place right on a river. The people were natural and kind, with the exception of one of Hugh Hefner's ex-girlfriends, who came in after bike riding with a bunch of her friends and was very rude. The other exception was the restaurant owner's wife, who hated me and treated me horribly. It was almost comical how much of a shrew the woman was. It was clear she wanted me out of there. I hadn't seen a grown woman behave in such a way except for in the movies. I wasn't terribly shocked at the cattiness. I had seen my fair share, but it was kind of unexpected for it to be happening in such a wholesome place. She got so incorrigible that I ended up being fired, or I quit. I think I quit, but I can't remember. My 9-year-old cousin got a job there 10 years later and had the exact same problem with the exact same woman, if you can believe it. I don't want to say she was jealous, but the only thing I can think of was that maybe she had a problem with her husband having affairs with the staff or something, and she wanted to drive out the decent-looking girls. Since there were no other places in town hiring, I decided to look elsewhere. A few days later, I got on a bus by myself and took the 20-minute or so ride into the next city, which happened to be Aspen, Colorado. I was wearing a baby blue eyelet sundress from Playmates of Hollywood, white sandals, and tons of makeup. It was the end of summer. I think it was September or maybe even October. I got off the bus at some sort of Grand Central station. The city was beautiful. It was, of course, an upscale ski resort full of international jet-setters, but that wasn't what I loved, believe it or not. There were huge, bright green mountains on all sides of me. There were Swiss chalet-style hotels and buildings. There were old-fashioned lamp posts, striped awnings, and a lot of Victorian-type architecture mixed with the sturdy brick buildings of a former mining town. It was so picturesque and scenic there. You couldn't tell what decade or country you were in. It was just timeless. I half expected some yodeling son of a bitch to zoom by me on a bobsled, or the Von Trapps from The Sound of Music to come frolicking over the mountaintops in lederhosen. There were a ton of people around for some festival. It was either the Food and Wine Classic, the Playboy Jazz Festival, or something of that sort. There were always a lot of festivals in the summertime. I think there was a comedy one as well. I started walking toward the buildings, pretending I knew what I was doing. I was kind of excited. I thrived in that sort of situation, especially with a little booze down the old hatch. I found a bar called The Ute. I went in, had a glass of wine for my nerves, and then set out to bat my eyelashes and get a job. I had no idea where anything was, and I was not about to buy a map and look like a tourist. Banish the thought. I would have rather died. I was buzzed and alone, but curious. I was happy to see clothing stores that I recognized, but I knew I wouldn't be able to buy so much as a sock at any of them. There were Chanel and Christian Dior boutiques, Louis Vuitton and Bulgari stores. Bulgari? I don't know how to say it, guys. I was thinking I would be happy just seeing a wet seal, but no. There was not a lot of in-between. You had to be a baller to even slightly enjoy yourself there. Stop it. Sorry, guys. There were furriers, high-end jewelry stores, and art galleries. And if you wanted to eat, you were not eating at Applebee's, my friend. You were eating at Matsuhisa Nobu's or Willow Creek at the Ritz. After I finished my wine, I walked up Galena Street past a few stores, and I saw a total tourist restaurant. It was the only restaurant I recognized. It was a fucking wonder I even found a chain restaurant, because Aspen locals absolutely, fire-breathingly, I know that is not a word, loathed any retail chain of any kind. There was a gap on the corner, and people were practically spitting on the sidewalk. I didn't understand what the problem was. I gathered that the places weren't special because there was more than one of them, but I didn't get the idea that they were considered common and low class. I found the chains comforting, but then again, I was also wearing glitter body lotion and baby blue nail polish. I went into the chain restaurant and asked for a manager, preparing to flirt if he were a guy, and thankfully it was a relatively young guy, and by the time I got home, there was a message on their answering machine telling me to come in for training the next week. I later found out it was because I supposedly looked like a brunette Pamela Anderson, which is pretty much the look I was going for. Hey, I'm not claiming I was smart. A week later, I started training at my new job. I was none too pleased with the uniform. It was hands down the ugliest uniform I ever wore in my life, the brown polyester slacks at Thrifty's notwithstanding. I had to wear this very loud tourist-looking Hawaiian-type shirt that featured tons of very bright primary colors splattered all over it. And you know how I feel about primary colors. It was so hateful and humiliating. And to top it off, the shirts were so huge that I couldn't properly show off my proportions, which was something I considered important to my tips. I tried my damnedest to show that I had a waist, but it was nearly impossible. I decided to do the only logical thing a girl could do in that situation, wear a very short skirt. Yes, we could also wear pants, but who in their right mind would do that? So I was in this rainbow baggy shirt, a short skirt, and some black tennis shoes. I was so not chic. I was geared up and ready to work, hoping the kids I worked with would be cool and fun. I enjoyed the nonstop upbeat music played on a loop in the restaurant. It was fun to dance around to when I was setting out the sugar caddies and salt and peppers. I thought, now this is a nice but I was cut short. There was a strong smell of burning plastic in the kitchen, a smell I have only smelled once again in New York, and yes, that would be crack. Crack as in crack cocaine. I forgot who told me, but I was like, seriously, dude? Don't think that shit was a one-time occurrence either. Like someone had a bad day back there making burgers. Those guys smoked crack all the time, despite the place being a family-oriented tourist spot. There was a beautiful upscale makeup place straight across the street. I would stand at the front window in my baggy rainbow-colored shirt and stare at it like a starving child would a bakery or a candy store. I knew I could never afford anything inside, but it didn't stop me from dreaming. The minimum wage in Colorado at that time was only around $2 an hour, and I didn't exactly get the good sections at work. I was broke. I wore the cheapest, crappiest, thickest makeup you have ever seen. I looked downright spackled like a bad sheet cake. I had on tons of glitter all the time, don't ask me why, and frosty, silvery, pink lip gloss that was gooey at the corners of my mouth. I had my hair in 2 low ponytails, and it was breaking off and thin from being out of my good hair products. I was pale already because there was nowhere to tan. I looked busted. I never had the right clothes for that town. I wore my work clothes on the bus to Aspen with either a baby blue or a pale lavender puffy jacket over them. I usually had either a light pink, blue, or lavender headband on as well. I don't know why I always dressed like I was 10. It was probably because that was the last time I was happy. I even had, a light blue furry day planner to go with my nails, hanging my head in shame. I would pass by people with fresh, dewy skin and beautifully done highlights wearing soft, buttery leather boots and fur jackets, getting into cream-colored Range Rovers, and think to myself that they looked so dull and boring and needed to get with the program. Halloween rolled around, and I dressed up as a James Bond girl. I don't know which one I was going for. I think I just wanted an excuse to wear white patent leather go-go boots and huge false eyelashes with chalky pink lipstick. Wait, I normally did not need an occasion to wear such things. I found an emerald green 60s dress at a thrift store and stuck a toy gun in my boot, which was my my cousin's, sorry, and then went off with the one friend I had, a lesbian named Katie. We went to a club called the Tippler, which was at the base of one of the ski mountains. It was right next to a hotel called the Little Nell, and it was the closest thing to what I was used to. It played top 40 pop and was a little flashier than the other local spots, although not by much. A month or so later, it started to snow in the daytime. It was dark and overcast. I went outside with a coworker, and we looked up into the sky, and we put out our tongues to catch snowflakes. The streets were dead, and the ski season hadn't started yet, and it was still just the locals. Twinkly lights lit up the brick buildings, and the smell of cinnamon wafted from the bakery next door. The street looked flocked, like white velvet, and the old lampposts were lit up, releasing a dim glow. The sidewalks were heated, so the snow never blocked the way of passers-by. I felt like I was on a movie set of some sort. It was so perfect. When the ski season hit and the 4 mountains were open for skiing, The town was a madhouse. The wimps went to Buttermilk, which was the easiest of the mountains. That was where a lot of the kids I knew taught skiing. Most of the guys went to Snowmass Mountain on their days off because that was the only place that would allow snowboarding at the time. The hotshots in town skied the runs on Ajax, which was like the coolest thing you could possibly do. There was a fourth mountain called Aspen Highlands, which was more intense than Buttermilk and less so than Ajax. I didn't know how to ski, and I got a lot of shit for it. I knew I would be stupid to try because I didn't have health insurance, and if I broke something, I would not be able to wait tables. I also couldn't afford the gear, not even to rent. But the real reason was because I did not have the true urge to get near a sport of any kind. I stayed inside watching the reports on JonBenet Ramsey, a little girl who had been murdered in Boulder, which was nearby. It freaked me out that they couldn't figure out who did it. There were new shows out around then. MTV had a Beavis and Butthead spinoff called Daria that I watched, and I also watched lots of the TV show version of Clueless. I quickly became popular at work for being over the top and friendly. I thought I was fabulous, and my coworkers got a kick out of it. I would interview everyone I worked with when I was bored and soon became the social director of the place, arranging parties and outings and activities. I was also the person who gave all of the girls makeovers. I did not have much to work with in the way of supplies, but I had the skills to turn plain Janes into glittery LA pole dancers. As different kids came in for different shifts at work, and I started to get to know everyone, I figured out who the partiers were. Basically, it was the night shift kids that went out drinking, and the responsible older day shift people went home and knitted scarves or played solitaire with themselves or something. One time we all got wasted and went sledding on Aspen Mountain, aka Ajax, in the dark, with bottles in our hands, singing that rap song, Tootsie Roll, at the top of our lungs. I think it was new at the time. The mountain was not exactly best for drunken antics. It was no joke. It had a black diamond terrain, and it was like 11,000 feet high or something. Not that we got that far up. We nearly smashed into a snowmobile at the bottom, but we rolled out of the way just in time. We were going to the left, to the left, to the left. We were out of control because we would lean to the left. One of the Kennedys was actually killed on that mountain about a year later, as was Sonny Bono the year after that, and both of them hit trees while skiing, which was really sad. We all partied at the Tippler, usually, but sometimes I was dragged to other places, like the Smuggler and a place called Little Annie's that had red checkered tablecloths and lots of people in flannel shirts drinking microbrews. Not my thing, chicken wing. One day, a girl at work showed me an ad in the Aspen Times, intern wanted for magazine. She and I had talked about our interests, and she knew I was into journalism. After much encouragement from my aunt, I called the ad, and they agreed to interview me. It was a magazine called Aspen Magazine. I took the bus to their offices one morning. They were on Durant Avenue, overlooking Aspen Mountain, in a big log building with huge glass windows. I walked through the little lobby to see beautiful, stylish women with long legs and thick hair, and they brought me into a little office that looked out onto some pine trees, and I met this chic, petite Asian woman who was to interview me. We talked a bit, and I told her how much I had always loved writing and reading, and I threw in some funny stories about how out of place I was in Colorado. She seemed quite amused with me, and she liked my spark, but in the end, she said she couldn't grant me the internship because the other candidates were college students, and that was one of the requirements. I told her that someone either had it or they didn't, and I had it, college or no college. I didn't even know what I meant by that, but it just came out. She smiled, and she said she admired me for believing in myself. She said she would keep me in mind if something opened up. I left disappointed but not defeated because I saw that she at least liked me somewhat. Just being in those offices made my heart hurt. I wanted so badly to write and be involved with the hustle and bustle of a magazine, to do something productive and creative. Then I thought, well, that place is for kids with parents, and education and connections, not for someone like me. That kind of stuff doesn't happen to people like me. Bertie begged me to fly back to L.A. for New Year's Eve that year. She said her parents would pay for it, and I thought, shit, why not? When I got to the Denver airport, my flight was canceled, and the next one was 8 hours later, and I have never been so bored. I wrote on a notepad. Journal entry, December 29th, 1996. I'm on an 8-hour layover in the Denver airport. I've surprised myself by not going crazy. I just read an entire book, and then I bought this pad and pencil like a geek. Last night, I had a total of 2 hours of sleep. It was an absolutely terrible night. First of all, I had to take a 4-hour bus ride to Denver. It shouldn't have taken that long, but the old bag of a bus driver started driving the wrong way, and didn't realize it until we were an hour and a half out. She had to turn around and backtrack for an extra hour or so with no apologies, just attitude. Of course, it made us very late. And then to top it off, the bitch said we were arriving in Detroit. She didn't even know where the hell she was. I sat next to this 21-year-old boy on the bus, a college student. He was a terrible bore. I listened to his unimpressive stories of dorm life for a good hour while nodding off. I was trying to be polite at first, but after hours of it, I became delirious. I immediately stopped pretending I was an intellectual like him when I broke a nail. I couldn't help it. I went ballistic. I blew my cover. I was shrieking. Then I decided to pull out my big bag of beauty supplies out of my baby blue carry-on. He was peeking at all of my stuff, so I handed each thing to him and told him what it was for. You should have heard this guy's stories. He said you had to cherish red wine. It's a religious experience. You need to put on classical music and breathe in the aroma of the wine and savor it. I fucked up his whole speech by interrupting him when he got to the pleasures of Merlot by saying, the only thing I did with wine was pour the entire bottle into a huge cup, get a straw, and try to pound it in 2 gulps. His appreciation of French castles, oh please, and fine art were equally phony and rehearsed. I'm sure he probably has some great internship somewhere, chosen over the losers like me. Kills me. His knowledge of the arts was completely ridiculous because he didn't even know the realism from surrealism. Surrealism had to explain it to him, and it's not even like I picked the subject either. It was even more funny when he tried whipping out some cinematography knowledge, because then broken-nailed bimbo here had to explain mise en scène to the bastard. Basically, this prissy airhead fucked up the schoolboy. It was entertaining. He said, you rock my world! And he totally loved me, and I even gave him my number so he could call me and praise me some more. The bus was the least of it, though. 4 hours on that crappy bus was heaven compared to the rest of the night. I'm laughing right now because I am so miserable. I've been here since 7:30 a.m. It's now 2 p.m. and my flight's at 5:45 p.m. I had a rather crusty and leathery beef dip for lunch. That has ended my addiction to beef dips once and for all. The little teenage girl with braces who served it to me gave me a free Coke. Moving on, here's the rest of the story of last night. My friend of 8 years, Justin Sandstrom, happens to live in Denver now. He picked me up at the bus station, and we went to this distinguished, old-fashioned sort of bar, and we weren't very distinguished in our drink orders, though. I ordered a Malibu Bay Breeze and him a White Russian. Tacky personified, but we aren't exactly Scotch drinkers at 23. We actually looked rather preppy. Some strangers even came up to us and asked us where we shopped. I snapped, we're not from here, rather rudely. Justin was asking about my romantic life. We used to talk about all of that stuff all the time when we were teenagers, and it was no big deal, but things have changed. I planned to stay at Justin's house to save myself the price of a hotel room in Denver, as my flight was first thing in the morning. Now, this is probably the one guy in the world who would never, ever try putting the moves on me. This was a guy I completely trusted and who restored my one iota of faith in men, just knowing he was alive. When we got to his place, I became very uncomfortable. There was a lot of tension in the room. I agreed to smoke some pot with him. I was sure it would help the tension, but it didn't. It got worse. He got all quiet and he was staring at me, and I felt uneasy, and then I became increasingly paranoid because his best friend had killed himself in the adjacent room in the year prior. It was a really horrible thing for Justin to go through, but because I was stoned, my only thought was, is this guy going to kill me? Maybe he's actually a murderer. He kept moving closer and closer to me, and I thought, this guy's going to pull out a machete and hack me to pieces, and nobody knows where the hell I am. Nobody would find me. Then he got extremely close to me and started stroking my hair. He was trying to mac on me. I couldn't believe he thought I would go for it. This was a good friend of mine, whom I thought respected me. I was so insulted. I got mad. Now, I know he's a guy, and it's in their nature to try such things, and we girls are the ones that have to decline their advances or play dumb and pretend we didn't get the hint so as not to offend them. I am a pro at that one, but I was pissed that I had to worry about all of that with him, my friend. He was saying the sappiest shit I ever heard. It sounded like Pepe Le Pew. He was saying I needed to be loved right, and that I was a beautiful Italian woman and he was a beautiful Italian man. Can you believe he said that? And we were there together and he loved me. He loved me? That's what majorly put me over the edge. How dare he try to pull that shit with me? Me! Like I would fall for that. He had to go and say he loved me to try to get me in bed. I was no longer afraid of that machete. If that motherfucker had one, I would have snatched it from his fucking hand and cold sliced his head off and then kicked it like a football off into the Rocky Mountains. Normally, he is the most sensitive and sweet person in the world. It was hard hearing him try to pull off that stuff. I was cringing for him. He was not good at it. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I told him he was a bullshitter and I deserved more than some stupid lines like that. I told him I was in no way ready to sleep with anyone, let alone him, and I told him it was a mistake to have stayed at his house. I tried to go to sleep because I had to be up at 6:30, but he had me up until 4 a.m. trying to spew out his romantic philosophical lines that he surely spent hours memorizing. It was one of the greatest disappointments I have had in my life. My father was one, my ex-boyfriend Jimmy was the other. Finding out they were liars and not who they said they were, that was bad. This guy was only a friend and not a family member or a love interest, but it was a great betrayal to me. There are very, very few males I trust. Along with some of my male childhood friends, I trusted Justin. I feel very let down but not surprised. So anyway, he drove me to the airport this morning and I completely ignored him. And when I got here, my flight was canceled. I damn near lost it. So that is where I am now. The LA trip was fun. Bertie and I went to a party at Sylvester Stallone's house. From what I can recall, his teenage son, Sage, threw a rager. I think Sage is no longer with us, you guys. I hope that's not true. I was getting settled back into my life at my aunt's, when the phone rang. One of my little cousins said it was for me. I got on the phone to hear the voice of the woman who had interviewed me for the internship at Aspen magazine. She said there was an opening and asked me if I were still interested. I choked on my cranberry juice. They wanted me? Me? I had no experience with magazines or offices in general. I just knew I loved writing. Was that enough? Could I pull it off without fucking the whole thing up?